My name is Megan Knutsen, and I am the Senior Director of Clinical Operations and Project Management for n-Lorem. In this role, I oversee the logistics of each patient program from the point of application through treatment. At n-Lorem, we follow a well-established process for ASO discovery and development, which many of my colleagues have shared extensive detail about. Throughout our process, there are many key roles and responsibilities that each physician and institution plays. Patients and their families also contribute in various ways throughout the process as well. This presentation will further highlight the operational aspects of the physician and patient experience, which happens alongside ASO discovery and development. Following patient acceptance into the n-Lorem portfolio, the first phase of our process is referred to as preparing for screening. During this phase, we are focused on obtaining the necessary sequencing data and cell material to move forward into ASO discovery. Long-read whole genome sequencing data is required for the majority of our programs and is a critical piece of our ASO design process. And since screening of candidate ASOs first occurs in each patient's cells, obtaining this material is also required for us to move a patient program forward. To support our efforts and prepare for screening, the first key responsibility of each physician who has a patient accepted by n-Lorem is to generate and provide a cell line for the patient. In some cases, a cell line may already be available, but in many instances, this requires several steps to be completed first. In order to collect cells from a patient, there must be a research protocol which has been approved by an IRB and that the patient can consent to. Developing a research protocol and obtaining this approval can often take many months. Then, after the protocol is approved and the patient has provided consent, collecting patient samples and generating the cell line can take several additional months. Once a cell line is ready to send to n-Lorem, a legal agreement called a Material Transfer Agreement, or MTA, is required. Depending on the institution, negotiation of this agreement can take between 2 to 12 months. For this reason, we often begin the review and execution process of the MTA immediately after patient acceptance. By doing this, we can build efficiency upfront and avoid contracting delays once the cells are ready. To be sure we're staying connected to each physician during this phase of the project, we typically meet 2 to 3 times per year. This allows us to receive up-to-date clinical information on how each patient is doing and to provide updates on our process. It is important to note that all program updates flow to patients and their families through their physician, which is another reason why our regular meetings are so important. As a patient, during this phase of the project, you will need to consent to provide samples that will be used to generate the sequencing data we need. For programs that require sequencing, the physician is informed upon patient acceptance and will then notify you. The physician will provide an introduction for the patient to n-Lorem sequencing provider, who will then collect consent to move forward. If previously collected DNA is available through the physician, this can be used to generate the data we need. Alternatively, our sequencing provider will provide the patient with a buccal swab kit, which allows sample collection to take place at home and then be shipped and used as input material. Generation of the sequencing data is provided by n-Lorem at no cost to patients or their physicians, and the data is returned directly to n-Lorem in a format that we need for our ASO design. Another key role for patients during this phase of the project is contributing samples to create a cell line. For programs that require a cell line, the physician is informed upon patient acceptance and will then notify the patient. To generate these cells, the patient needs to consent to sample collection and contribute either blood or a skin punch biopsy. As I noted previously, information regarding n-Lorem's progress flows through the physician to the patient. For this reason, it is incredibly important that patients maintain a close relationship with their physician and continue to have routine clinic visits throughout our process. Any questions about where we are in the process should be directed to the physician, who will then keep you informed. The end of our preparing for screening phase is marked by what we call the technical assessment. This is an analysis of the patient's sequencing data to confirm our ASO design strategy. This is performed once the sequencing data is provided to n-Lorem and the cell line has been received. Occasionally, due to the unique genetic sequence of each patient, we determine at this stage that we do not have a path forward. In the rare instance that occurs, we immediately notify the physician. In total, the preparing for screening activities take an average of 3 to 12 months, but can be highly variable, primarily based on cell line availability, cell type required, and the speed at which the MTA is completed. I'd like to highlight several important points regarding cell line generation. We place a lot of emphasis on creating and receiving cells because the very first step in our ASO discovery process involves screening candidate ASOs in the patient cells. This means that we cannot move forward at n-Lorem until we have those cells in-house. As I just talked through, this can be an involved process that takes many months, and it's a key responsibility of each physician to navigate. For this reason, we really jump right into it after each patient is accepted into our portfolio if we know that we will need cells. There are two types of cells that we typically use in our screening process, either fibroblasts or induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs. Each patient program only needs one of these types of cells, and the cell type is determined by the anticipated expression level of the gene target in different tissue types. After patient acceptance, we will communicate to the physician which cell type is required for the patient. If fibroblasts are needed, this takes on average 3 to 6 months to generate and begins with a skin punch biopsy. Fibroblasts are relatively straightforward to create and inexpensive. Most often, we see fibroblast cell lines being created through research labs at the physician's institution, or even in some cases through insurance if it is ordered as a diagnostic test. Alternatively, if iPSCs are needed, this process takes much longer and carries a significant cost. In our experience, creating iPSCs can take between 6 to 12 months after sample collection and begins with either a blood draw or a skin punch biopsy. Because this cell type is complex to create, the cost is also significant. It is important to note that all costs associated with generating cells, whether fibroblasts or iPSCs, falls to the physician to navigate. Another point to highlight is regarding the sequencing data that we need for our process. Although all patients accepted by n-Lorem have had previous genetic testing completed, our ASO design software requires a very specific type of sequencing data that most patients have not had. Long-read whole genome sequencing data is not a form of testing that is offered broadly, which is why we work with a specific laboratory to generate what we need at no cost to patients or their physicians. Once we have the materials and data we need and have confirmed our ASO design strategy, we move into the ASO discovery part of our process. During ASO discovery, we are screening the candidate ASOs in each patient's cells, performing other cell-based assays, and conducting the first of 2 animal studies. During ASO discovery, each physician has many responsibilities to facilitate the process. Since each of our treatments is individualized, this means that the goals for each patient will also be individualized. Early in our process, we will work closely with the physician to define the unique treatment goals for their patient. Once the goals are established, we then work together to identify the tools and standardized assessments that will be used over time to measure those goals. During this process, the physician will present a summary of their patient and the proposed goals and assessments to our STAR committee. This presentation is done to ensure that our plan is as scientifically robust as possible. Additionally, since each patient's potential benefit with treatment will be measured against themselves, it becomes very important for physicians to collect sufficient data before treatment begins. Once the treatment goals and assessments are set, the physician will begin collecting that data, often during the routine clinic visits they have with the patient throughout the year. Before each application is submitted, n-Lorem will meet with each physician to review the process and financial commitments in order to confirm that there will be a path forward for treatment at their institution. However, at this time in our process, additional details are expected to be shared by the physician and the path needs to be further clarified. This requires the physician to work closely with their institution and administrative teams to further confirm support for the program and secure any necessary funding for treatment. Part of this process is to initiate the review of the Treatment Evaluation Agreement, or T. This legal agreement functions like a clinical trial agreement, but it is unique to the n-Lorem process and can take many months to review and execute. A key difference in this agreement versus the types of agreements that most institutions review for clinical trials is that our agreements do not include a study budget. n-Lorem's funds are dedicated to ASO discovery, development, and providing the drug itself for free for life of the patient. But the costs associated with administering treatment itself fall to the physician and institution to navigate. This is a unique model and requires advocacy by the physician within their institution to move things forward. Throughout this phase, n-Lorem will continue meeting at least quarterly with each physician to work on treatment goals, data collection, and helping to facilitate legal review of the T. As the patient or loved one of a patient, it is again important to maintain communication and routine clinic visits with the physician throughout this time. In this way, the physician will keep you informed of n-Lorem's progress through ASO discovery and will work with you to obtain your input into the treatment goals. At the start of ASO discovery, we typically have a large pool of candidate ASOs, and the goal of this process is to identify a single lead ASO which will move into development. If we are successful in identifying a lead ASO, this will mark the end of the discovery process. Because the design and discovery process can be iterative, the timeline for this phase of the project is variable. Complexity of the gene target, the type of cell line we are screening in, and a variety of other factors can all influence the timeline. However, on average, ASO discovery takes approximately 8 to 12 months to complete. With the estimated discovery timeline in mind, we tried to define treatment goals early on to ensure we have adequate pre-treatment data collected. If possible, at least 1 year of data collected prior to treatment using the assessments that will then be used during treatment is ideal. As I noted, the T can also take many months to execute and must be in place before we can ship drug to a site for treatment. It may seem early in the process to initiate this agreement now, but we've seen it take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years to execute depending on the institution, and it often takes many rounds of reviews to finalize. Starting the review process during discovery helps us work efficiently to prevent delays to patient treatment down the road. If we are successful in identifying a lead ASO candidate, there is another step of the process required before we can move into development. This will be seen on the next slide. This is a synthesis step which takes approximately 2 months to complete. During this time, our team is hard at work scheduling next steps with our CRO partners to move efficiently into development. ASO development marks a critical time in our process as we move closer to potential patient treatment. During this time, the lead ASO candidate is being tested in the second of 2 animal studies and also undergoing drug manufacturing. The animal study is a 13-week GLP toxicology study, which is required by the FDA under the N-of-1 ASO guidance. Although the study itself is 13 weeks, there are approximately 3 months of tissue and data analysis and reporting, which follow at the end of the study. In parallel, we also arrange for the drug to be manufactured according to FDA guidelines so that it is ready for patient treatment. Once the documentation from the GLP toxicology study and manufacturing process is available, the n-Lorem team then moves into IND preparation. The IND is a collection of documents totaling more than 1,000 pages, which will then be submitted by n-Lorem to the FDA for review. One key element of the IND is the individualized patient treatment protocol. In order to finalize this piece, the physician will work closely with n-Lorem to develop the content using the previously defined treatment goals and outcome assessments. These specific protocol attributes will also be used to develop the informed consent form, or ICF, which the patient will later sign before initiating treatment. Although n-Lorem authors approximately 90% of the IND content, physicians are expected to contribute to the clinical section, which is patient-specific. As activity ramps up closer to treatment, n-Lorem will begin meeting with each physician monthly to ensure that things are on track for submission to the FDA. At this time, it also becomes critical to have the T finalized or nearly finalized, and site funding secured for patient treatment if that hasn't been done already. As a patient or family member, it is increasingly important to maintain close communication with the physician during this time as we begin to prepare for dosing. For patients who do not live geographically close to their physician, this may mean beginning to plan for travel. Additionally, if the physician requires assistance with fundraising, this is an important time to begin assisting with that element as well. Now, one point that I haven't highlighted yet is the REDCap database. Because each patient and their treatment goals are unique, n-Lorem actually designs a custom database for each patient in a system called REDCap. This is an electronic system that the physician will use to input data that was collected before treatment began and after treatment begins. Once we have a finalized treatment protocol, which is usually based on what is submitted to the FDA, our team can get started on building this database. This is another way we work efficiently to be sure we are ready to go once FDA approval is received. In general, the development phase will last an average of 8 to 12 months, and the end of this phase is signified by the official submission of the IND to the FDA by n-Lorem. Once the IND is submitted, we move into the regulatory phase of our process, the home stretch before treatment begins. As the regulatory sponsor, n-Lorem will hold the IND for the life of the study and manage all FDA communication and regulatory reporting obligations. This alleviates a huge burden from the physician and site and ensures consistency in documentation across all n-Lorem programs. After the FDA notifies n-Lorem that the study may proceed, IRB approval at the site level is then initiated by the physician. n-Lorem helps facilitate this process as needed, but it is ultimately the physician and their study team who lead this step. Once IRB approval is received, we then begin preparing for dosing. This involves completing training on REDCap for the site, scheduling the drug to be shipped, and conducting a remote site initiation visit. Because there is so much activity at this time, n-Lorem and the physician will be meeting bi-weekly during this phase. Although not noted here, if it hasn't been executed yet, the T must be executed at this time in order to move forward. Many sites do not sign the T until both FDA and IRB approvals have been received, so many agreements are actually signed during this phase versus during development. However, if it is not ready for signatures at the time of IRB approval, the T then becomes rate limiting to patient treatment. As a patient during this time, the focus remains on maintaining communication to enable first dose planning and providing support to the site as needed. Once all regulatory approvals are in place, training is complete, the T is signed, and the drug is on site, treatment can begin. On average, the regulatory phase takes a minimum of 2 months. After the IND is submitted, the FDA has 30 calendar days to respond, and in our experience, they typically take all 30 days. The timing for IRB approval is variable between institutions, but commonly takes 4 to 8 weeks to complete. For most institutions, this review process cannot begin until after the IND is approved. Because the vast majority of n-Lorem patients are CNS patients, a final point I wanted to highlight was regarding dose administration. One reason that we encourage travel planning for patients and their families early on is that for CNS indications, an overnight hospital stay is required by the FDA at the first dose and during each dose escalation. This can involve 4 to 5 overnight hospital stays during the first year of treatment alone. Patients are encouraged to reach out to their physician about this requirement and to learn more about what will be specifically required in the context of their unique treatment protocol. Finally, less of an acknowledgement and more of a thank you to the physicians and their research and administration teams. Thank you for working closely with us throughout the process and ensuring that we are bringing treatments to your patients as efficiently as possible. And also to the patients, their families, and loved ones, thank you for putting your trust in us and our process every day.